Hey everybody, Pastor Rod from Night Church. Just doing a recap from last night. Our message was entitled Richman, Poorman, and it was a study on the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And it's a challenging one because it speaks of some of the things that don't really get talked about. Understanding paradise, for example, and the chasm, where Abraham's bosom and then Hades and the chasm between. It's not a lot of talk about that. Of course, paradise was there until Jesus went and gathered everybody from paradise, closed the doors, and took them to heaven during his time between the crucifixion and the resurrection. But so that gets a little challenging to understand because there's not a lot of talk about it in the Bible, so we have very little information on it. But the big part of the story is really what was the difference between these two men. You see, because neither one had anything more or less to offer God. But the rich man ended up in going to hell eventually, right? Why? It wasn't because he was rich. Sorry. Being rich is not a sin. Not that I'd know, but it's not a sin. However, what was a sin was his selfishness, his greed, his indifference to the suffering of others, his apathy towards the needs of people in his community, for example. And his greatest sin was his faithlessness. He lived for himself. And when we look at Lazarus, Lazarus ended up in Abraham's bosom, which is where the Old Testament saints went. Being an Old Testament saint, that means he was redeemed. How was he redeemed? He was faithful. He was faithful to the end. And regardless of his circumstances or situation, which was not great, the world dealt harshly with him. Even the rich man, whose house he basically slept outside of in the entranceway, dealt poorly with him. But God, rich in mercy, saw his faithfulness to him, because he loved God clearly more than he loved anything else, including money and things of that nature. He was found faithful. This is the same way that we find salvation now, is putting our trust and faith in Jesus Christ. It's all about faith. So, interestingly enough, and one of the points we didn't really get to touch on yesterday was, I briefly mentioned that for some reason this is a parable, but it has a person's name in it, and that's not something that's traditionally found in parables. Parables always tend to be generic when it comes to the people. It's a certain man, or there was a man, or there was a certain lawyer, whatever it might be, but it never named a name, except in this parable, and it named the name Lazarus. Interestingly enough, the roots of that, and I'm going to close off with this, the roots of Lazarus is LAzarus, or the name LAzarus, which means God has helped. Pretty cool. So you can see why it was kind of a little interesting that he chose that, because God has helped him. And at the end of their lives, Lazarus received his reward for his faithfulness, and the rich man received his reward for his faithlessness. And again, it doesn't matter what we have in this life. None of us have more or less to offer God, and all he wants is us, our faith, our hearts, our minds. Because in order to love God, we need to recognize his love for us. We can't love him first, in a way, because he is love. He actually teaches us to love. So without that, we can never really love properly. And we see that a lot in the world. The word gets tossed around a lot, but most people don't know what it truly means. So, I close off with this. Love God, love people, and share the gospel. Share the good news with all you can. God bless, and hope to see you next time at Night Church.